probably have all heard the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their fiery trial, but have you heard the story like this? King Nebuchadnezzar had a gold statue made that was about 90 feet tall and about 9 feet wide. Then he set this huge golden idol up on the plain of Dura, which was in the province of Babylon. If you didn't know who King Nebuchadnezzar was, let me paint a picture for you. He was a king set up to overthrow God's people and rule over them. This happened because of the people's sin, and this was God's punishment for his people. King Nebuchadnezzar, who had a very large kingdom and ruled over many, was portrayed as this powerful and dominant ruler. He was known for his fierce anger of authority, along with his big ego and wanting people to worship him as a god. So after King Nebuchadnezzar built this golden statue, or should I say idol, he called all the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, rulers, and all other officials in his kingdom to come together. He wanted all of them to come see and be a part of this dedication ceremony for this huge golden idol that he had built. So all of these people came and stood in front of this idol that the King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the man who makes announcements for the king spoke in a loud voice to the crowd. He said, "All you people from many nations and languages, listen to me. This is what you are commanded to do. You must bow down as soon as you hear the sounds of all of these musical instruments played together." The speaker goes on to say, when you hear the horns, the flutes, the lyres, sambucas, harps, bagpipes, and all other musical instruments, you must worship the golden idol. King Nebuchadnezzar has set this idol up, and whoever does not bow down and worship this gold idol will immediately be thrown into the hot furnace. It's kind of weird that he had all of these musical instruments and they had to all be playing at the same time, so I'm kind of curious how that might have sounded like you worship this idol or you will die. Stupid. Now in the scriptures it doesn't really give much detail to what the statue looked like, but we could be safe to say that this huge golden statue might be in the appearance of King Nebuchadnezzar himself, or maybe in a form that would best represent him as a god to be worshipped by his people. So as soon as they heard the sound of all these musical instruments, they bowed down and began to worship this gold idol. All the people, nations, and different language groups that were there worshiped this gold idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then some of the Chaldeans came up to the king and began speaking against the people from Judea, which are also known as God's people. The Chaldeans, if you didn't know, were a violent group of people that captured the Jews as a manifestation of God's wrath. In other words, God used the Chaldeans to punish his people. The Chaldeans said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "King, may you live forever. King, you gave a command. You said that everyone who hears the sound of all of these musical instruments must bow down and worship the gold idol that you set up. And you also said that whoever doesn't bow down and worship the gold idol will be thrown into a hot furnace. But King, there are some Judeans who you made important officials in your province of Babylon that ignored your order. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They don't worship your gods, and they didn't bow down to worship the gold idol that you had set up." Now, many of us know who Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are, but did you know that's not even their real names? Yes, these are their slave names that were given to them to defame them from their identity in God. These names were given to honor pagan gods. This is what the king wanted to reflect his lifestyle and the ways the king lived. Their original names in order were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These names were a reflection of God, the creator of heaven and earth. Hananiah, which meant God is gracious, Mishael, meaning who is like God, and Azariah meant God has helped. These names were a testament to their faith and devotion to God, and it was stripped away by the king. But keep in mind, this was God's punishment to his people and their sins for not repenting. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar, hearing what the Chaldeans said, he became very angry.
"Make them bow."
In fact, he called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego so that they were brought to him. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't worship my gods? And is it true that you didn't bow down and worship the gold idol that I have set up? The king goes on and says that when they hear the sounds of all these musical instruments, they must bow down and worship the gold idol. He told them that if they are ready to worship the idol that he had made, that this would be a good thing for them. But if they don't worship it, they will be thrown very quickly into the hot furnace, where the king said no God will be able to save them from his power. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king and said, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to explain these things to you. If you throw us into the hot furnace, the God we serve can save us. And if he wants to, he can even save us from your power. But even if God does not save us, we want you to know that, King, we refuse to serve your gods. We will not bow down and worship this gold idol that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar became so angry with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that he gave an order for the oven to be heated, or this furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than it usually was. Then he commanded some of his strongest soldiers in his army to tie up the 3 men, and he told the soldiers to throw them into the hot furnace.
We put it into the fire.
So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up and thrown into the hot furnace. They were wearing these robes, pants, or cloth caps, and other clothes. The king was so angry when he gave the command, so the soldiers quickly made the furnace very, very, very hot. And the fire was so hot, in fact, that the flames killed the strong soldiers. They were killed when they got close to the fire to throw these 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were tied up so tightly with this rope that when they were thrown into the furnace, they actually fell down on the ground in this furnace where all this fire was heating up the furnace. Then all of a sudden, King Nebuchadnezzar jumped to his feet, and looking at the furnace, the king was shocked to see what he was seeing. He was very surprised, and he looked at his advisors and said, hey, we only tied up 3 men, and we only threw 3 men into the furnace, right? The advisors looked back at him and said, yes, king, that you were right. We only threw 3 men in. The king said, well, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire. They're not tied up, and they're not burned. And the 4th man kind of looks like an angel.
Got him!
Then Nebuchadnezzar went to the opening of the hot furnace, and he shouted to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego while covering his face, trying to not get burnt, and he told them to come out of this fire. He shouted at them, servants of the Most High God, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and when they had come out, the governors, the rulers, and all the people had crowded around them to see what was going on, to see this miracle, and they could see that the fire had not burned these 3 men. In fact, their bodies were not burnt at all. Their hair was not burned, and their robes were not burned, and there was not even the smell of fire was on them. Seeing this in shock, Nebuchadnezzar gave praise to God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he went on by saying and claiming to all the people that were there that God has sent his angels to save his servants from fire. And on top of that, these 3 men trusted their God and refused to obey the king's command. They were willing to die instead of serving or worshiping any other gods. After this happening, King Nebuchadnezzar made a new law which stated that if anyone from any nation or language who says anything about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would be cut into pieces, and their houses would be destroyed and made a dunghill. That means that their house would be made into a pile of poop. This was to mean that it would be degraded. Make them as low as possible. Oh my gosh. He's like, you want to disrespect God? I'm going to make your house a pile of poop. After all of this, the king gave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego more important jobs in the province of Babylon than they previously had. And they had a pretty good, I would say, job as serving the king in their province. See, under the pressure of pagan traditions and ways of the people in Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or should I say Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, did not give into the temptation of defiling their God of heaven and earth to bow down and worship false gods and idols. They stood strong in their faith even to the point of death. They said that they will not serve any other gods, and if they were thrown into the fiery furnace, that if If it were God's will to save them, He would, and if it wasn't, it's okay, because they weren't going to bow down to any other gods or idols. I really feel that this message is to be important and a great example of how we should live in today's modern world. We can see and find ourselves surrounded by the world and its desires, which these ways do not honor or even glorify God, and that we should stand firm in our faith to honor and worship God, the Creator of all, not giving into the world's way of doing things, even if it means we will be an outcast. I see it like this: the closer we get to God, the Father, the further we will get away from the world. If this story inspires you like it has me, type "God is good" and help me share this message and story by sharing this to someone. It's free and it helps spread the good news. God bless you.